Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins in a quiet room, where a man sat before a mirror and died staring into his own reflection. No signs of struggle, no trace of poison, only the look of terror frozen on his face, as if he had seen death itself, watching back. When Hercule Poirot arrives, he finds something far more unsettling than murder. A room where every object tells a story, and a mirror that refuses to forget what it saw. Was it guilt that killed him, or something darker still? And what secret does that reflection hold? Stay with us till the end. And if you love mysteries where even silence seems to breathe, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The Room That Wouldn't Forget. The fog rolled over the cliffs like a slow, silent tide. From the edge of the village, one could just make out the outline of Greyhaven Manor, an old, sprawling estate that looked as if it had been carved straight from the gloom itself. The house had stood for 2 centuries, its windows staring down at the sea like watchful eyes. It was a place with too many rooms and far too many secrets. Detective Hercule Poirot arrived that evening in a black car, stepping out just as thunder cracked above the cliffs. He adjusted his hat, his gaze lifting toward the manor's towering windows. The housekeeper, Mrs. Linton, greeted him at the door, a pale, trembling woman who seemed afraid to look anywhere for too long. "Thank you for coming, sir," she whispered, her voice tight. "It's about Mr. Harland. They found him this morning in the study." Poirot followed her through the dim hall, past portraits of the Harland family, stern faces, long gone, yet still seeming to stare down upon every visitor. The floor creaked under their steps like the house itself was listening. In the study, the air was thick and cold. The scent of smoke hung heavy, not from a fire, but from a candle snuffed too soon. On the floor, beside the desk, lay Mr. Edward Harland, the master of the house. His eyes were wide open, fixed on the mirror that stood across the room. A single bullet wound darkened his temple. But what froze everyone to the bone wasn't the sight of his death. It was the mirror. The mirror showed everything in the room: the fallen man, the overturned chair, the half-empty glass on the desk, but it did not show Mr. Harland. Poirot stood perfectly still. "No reflection," he murmured softly. Mrs. Linton nodded with trembling lips. "We all saw it, sir. The mirror refuses to show him. Just him." The local police inspector, a stout man named Grant, stood by the doorway, his hat in his hands. "We checked for fingerprints, for tricks, for false glass. Nothing. That mirror's older than any of us, and it's never done a thing like this." Poirot leaned closer to the mirror. Strange indeed. A man dies facing his own reflection, yet the glass denies him. Almost as if he paused, as if it refused to witness what happened. Grant frowned. "You think it's some kind of symbol?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No, Inspector. I think it's something much worse. Mirrors do not lie, unless someone makes them." That night, the storm raged across the cliffs. Lightning cracked over the sea, lighting the manor like a flash of revelation. Poirot stayed in the study long after everyone had gone to bed, standing before the mirror, watching the empty reflection. And then, as the clock struck midnight, something changed. For just a moment, a single, flickering instant, he saw movement. The mirror seemed to shimmer. A shadow crossed behind him, though the room was utterly still. Poirot turned quickly, but nothing was there. He faced the mirror again. His reflection remained calm, composed. But behind it, the shadow lingered. It was shaped like a man, and it was looking directly at him. The next morning brought no answers, only questions. The servant spoke in whispers about curses, about mirrors that steal souls, about old stories told by the Harland family. But Poirot dismissed superstition. He knew one truth above all: murder is a human act, not a supernatural one. He began with the family. Mrs. Evelyn Harland, the widow, graceful, cold, eyes red from sleepless nights. Dr. Mason, the family physician, nervous, overly polite. And Charles Harland, Edward's younger brother, the one who inherited everything now. Each gave their account. Each swore the mirror had nothing to do with it. But Poirot noticed small things. The widow never looked into the mirror. The doctor flinched whenever it was mentioned. And Charles? Charles laughed, but too quickly, too easily. When Poirot asked if the brothers were close, Charles replied, "We were close enough to share everything except the truth." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And what truth might that be, Mr. Harland?" Charles turned toward the mirror, his smile fading. "That sometimes," he whispered, "a man watches his own death long before it arrives." Later that day, Poirot examined the study again. He traced the edges of the mirror's frame, old wood, heavy, engraved with faint, unreadable markings. Behind it, he found something unusual, a hidden panel on the wall. Inside the panel was a small switch. And wires. He followed the wires down to the desk drawer, to a hidden mechanism connected to the lamp. A hidden electrical charge. It wasn't a curse. It was a device. Someone had wired the mirror to react to the current, to darken or distort its reflection when triggered. But that didn't explain why Edward Harland would have been facing it when he died, or how the shot had been fired from behind him. Poirot straightened slowly. "The mirror is not showing us the truth," he whispered, "because someone designed it not to." He turned toward the door. Somewhere in this house, the killer was watching him, perhaps even now, through a reflection of their own making. That night, the storm finally broke. The house fell silent, but Poirot couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in the darkness of Greyhaven Manor, someone, or something, was still watching. And when the candle by the mirror flickered and died on its own, he realized something dreadful. The mirror was never empty. It had been watching back all along. Chapter 2: The Face That Wouldn't Vanish. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sea mist still clung to Greyhaven Manor like a second skin. The world felt damp and heavy, as though the night had left behind more than just water. Poirot stood by the window of his room, staring out at the pale horizon where the cliffs met the restless ocean. The gulls were silent. Even they seemed uneasy. He turned back to his small breakfast tray, untouched, and stared at the silver coffee pot. The reflection on its surface was distorted, trembling with every breath of air in the room. For a long moment, he simply watched his own image ripple and fade. Then softly he said, "Someone in this house is watching through reflections. They have made them their ally." Downstairs, the manor had come alive with nervous movement. Servants carried trays. The widow drifted through the halls like a ghost, and the sound of the sea crashed faintly through the open windows. Poirot found Inspector Grant waiting in the study once again. The mirror had been covered with a white sheet, though even that could not disguise its shape. Grant rubbed his chin. "We checked the wiring you found. No doubt about it. That mirror was tampered with. Someone wanted it to behave oddly. But why? Psychological trick? Scare the victim?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Or distract him. You see, Inspector, men of intellect rarely die in fear, but they can die in confusion." He moved around the desk, examining a small detail, the ashtray. It was half filled with cigarette ends, but all of them were the same brand, except one, a slim, perfumed cigarette, lipstick marking the tip. Poirot held it up with his gloved fingers. Someone came to visit Mr. Harland before his death. A woman. She stayed long enough to smoke and left in a hurry. Grant frowned. His wife. Poirot shook his head. "Mrs. Harland does not smoke. And even if she did, this is not her kind of scent. It is younger, sharper." He turned to the doorway, and there she was. Miss Clara Vale, 27, a journalist who had been writing a piece on Edward Harland's rare art collection. She wore a black coat and an expression of deliberate calm. "I heard you wanted to speak to me, detective," she said. Poirot gestured for her to sit. "Indeed. You were one of the last people to see Mr. Harland alive." She crossed her legs carefully. "He was fine when I left. A little nervous, perhaps, but fine. He said he was expecting a visitor later that night. Someone who would finally tell him the truth." Poirot tilted his head. "And who was that?" She smiled faintly. "He didn't say, only that it would all be over soon." As she spoke, Poirot noticed something curious in her reflection on the polished desk surface. Her face appeared clear, too clear. The rest of the room rippled faintly in the wood grain, but her reflection stood still, unbothered, as though it didn't belong to the same world. When she rose to leave, he asked quietly, "Miss Vale, did you ever look in the mirror in this room?" She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "Only once," she said. "I didn't like what I saw." "And what did you see?" She looked back over her shoulder. "Myself, smiling. But I wasn't." That night, Poirot returned to the study alone. The house was silent again, too silent. He removed the sheet from the mirror. For a long while, he simply stared at his own reflection. The eyes, the features, everything exact, yet somehow hollow. The mirror gave back every detail, but none of the life. He spoke aloud, his voice soft. "Who are you watching, old friend? The dead man? Or the one who remains?" No answer, only the low hum of the storm outside. Then something subtle began to change. The reflection of the lamp flickered, though the real lamp remained steady. Poirot leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. In the glass, a faint outline appeared behind him. A face, not his own, slowly forming out of the shimmer. He turned sharply, but the room was empty. When he faced the mirror again, the second face was still there. Watching him, it was Edward Harland, pale, cold, and expressionless. His mouth began to move, but no sound came. Poirot froze, heart pounding, eyes locked on the impossible. And then the reflection smiled. The sound of glass cracking filled the air. Poirot stumbled back as a line split across the mirror's surface. The face vanished. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Inspector Grant burst in, revolver drawn. "Poirot, are you all right?" The detective straightened, his expression grave. "Perfectly, though I begin to understand why Mr. Harland met his end here. This mirror has been more than decoration. It has been a witness." Grant lowered his weapon slowly. "You saw something, didn't you?" Poirot nodded once. "Yes, but not what I expected. Tell me, Inspector, where is the brother tonight?" "Charles Harland? He's in the West Wing. Locked himself in his room. Says he's ill." Poirot's eyes hardened. Illness of guilt often looks like fever. They found Charles in his room, pacing like a trapped animal. The moment he saw them, he tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "I didn't kill him." Poirot held up a hand. "Calm yourself, sir. No one has accused you." Charles sank into a chair, trembling. "You don't understand. He was obsessed. That mirror, he believed it could see beyond death. He said he saw things in it, faces of those who were going to die. I thought he'd lost his mind." Poirot studied him carefully. "And yet you stayed in the house." "I had to," Charles whispered. "He said he'd written something for me. A confession, maybe. He told me it was hidden in the reflection itself." Poirot frowned. "In the reflection?" Charles nodded. He said, "If you want to find the truth, don't look in the mirror. Look behind it." Later that night, Poirot returned once again to the study, this time with a screwdriver, a lamp, and his unshakable calm. He worked carefully, removing the heavy mirror from the wall. Behind it, the old plaster was marked by dust and something else. A hidden compartment. Inside was a single notebook, wrapped in cloth. He opened it under the lamplight. The handwriting was tight and controlled, Edward Harland's. The first line read, "If I am found dead, know this. My killer will be looking back from the glass." Poirot read in silence. The pages told a story of paranoia, of voices in the night, of a mirror that seemed to change when no one was watching. Harland had written that someone had been entering the study at night, tampering with the glass, leaving messages only he could see. The last entry ended abruptly. I can see my own face behind the reflection. It's smiling, and I am not. Poirot sat for a long time, the notebook resting in his lap. The air in the room felt thicker, colder. He looked up at the bare wall where the mirror had hung. The shape of it was still visible in the dust, but in the faint shine of the glass shards on the floor, something glimmered, a faint outline, like a face waiting to reappear. He stood slowly. Whoever killed Edward Harland, he murmured, did not fear being seen. They feared being remembered. He turned off the lamp. The room sank into darkness, and just before he closed the door, he heard it, a faint click like the sound of glass shifting. He turned back. For one brief moment, the mirror, cracked, broken, impossible, showed his reflection again. But behind it, standing perfectly still, was another Poirot, watching and smiling. Chapter 3: The Death That Watched Itself. The dawn crept over the cliffs in shades of pale gray and bone-white light. The storm had finally died, leaving Greyhaven Manor soaked in silence. No one spoke much at breakfast. The servants avoided the study entirely, as if the room itself had turned into a wound that refused to close. Poirot sat by the window, sipping his coffee, his eyes unfocused. He had not slept. The events of the night replayed in his mind. The reflection that smiled, the words of the notebook, and that final impossible image, his own face, looking back at him from beyond the glass. He set the cup down with care and whispered, "Who was the true reflection, I wonder? The man, or his memory?" Inspector Grant entered quietly, his face drawn. "We just had word from the coroner. The bullet in Harland's skull was fired at very close range. But the powder marks are all wrong, too faint. Whoever fired that gun used something to block the residue." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, a cloth perhaps, or a glove. Something deliberate." Grant hesitated. "And there's more. We found fingerprints on the back of the mirror frame. Not Harland's, not the servant's. They belonged to his brother, Charles." Poirot rose at once. Then at his time the mirror faced him once again. The west wing of Greyhaven Manor was cold and empty. Charles Harland stood near the fireplace, his hands shaking as he tried to light a cigarette. When Poirot entered, he didn't even look up. "I knew you'd come," Charles muttered. "It's what you do, isn't it? You keep coming back until someone breaks." Poirot's voice was calm. "And are you ready to break, Mr. Harland?" Charles gave a tired laugh. "Break? No. I broke the night my brother started seeing his own death in that cursed mirror." Poirot stepped closer. "Tell me what happened that night." Charles stared into the fire. "He called me into the study. He said he knew who was trying to destroy him. He said the mirror had shown him the truth. Then he turned, reached for something in his desk, and he stopped, his voice catching. I only wanted to stop him. He had a gun. He was losing his mind." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And so you shot him?" Charles turned, his face pale. "No, he fired first. At his reflection. I swear it. He said he had to kill the image before it killed him." Grant frowned. "That doesn't make sense." Poirot's voice was soft. "Oh, but it does. To a man who could no longer tell the difference between what he saw and what watched him back." They returned to the study. The mirror had been reassembled as best as possible, the cracks sealed, though its surface was now webbed with faint scars. It looked older, more alive. Poirot stood before it in silence. "Every clue, every secret, every lie," he said, "leads back to this object. Edward Harland believed he could see beyond life, that the mirror could show what was hidden from men. But in truth, it only showed what someone wanted him to see." He turned toward Grant. "The wires, the tampering, that was not the work of a grieving widow, nor a frightened servant. It was a plan, one meant to drive Edward mad. Grant frowned. You think someone set him up to believe the mirror was haunted? Poirot nodded. Yes. And once he believed it, it became his cage. His mind did the rest. He turned to Charles Harland. You rigged the mirror. You fed his fears, made him question what was real. You wanted him to lose control, to end his own life. Charles took a step back. No, I only meant to scare him. He ruined everything we had. He took the family fortune. He cut me out of the will. I thought if he saw what he wanted to see, if the mirror frightened him enough, he'd leave. But he didn't leave, Poirot said quietly. He stayed, and he stared into the glass until he saw death staring back. Charles's hands trembled. It wasn't supposed to happen. I swear, I didn't pull the trigger. Poirot's gaze hardened. No, Mr. Harland, but you built the reflection that did. The words seemed to drain the air from the room. The inspector moved forward, but Poirot raised a hand. His eyes were fixed on the mirror, and something in his expression changed. Look, he said softly. In the cracked surface, Charles's reflection was still visible, but something was wrong. The reflection stood perfectly still, even as Charles himself began to step backward. Grant blinked. What in the... Poirot whispered. The mirror still remembers. The reflection turned its head, a slow, unnatural motion, and smiled. Then the glass split down the center with a sharp, ringing sound. Charles stumbled, falling to his knees. What's happening? Poirot stepped closer, voice cold and calm. The death that watched your brother now watches you. Charles looked up, face pale as chalk. His breath quickened. No, it's not real. But the reflection was already fading, taking his image with it. He screamed once, clutching his chest, and then he was still. When they turned him over, he was dead. The coroner later said it was a heart attack. But those who were there, who saw what the mirror did, never truly believed that. Poirot said nothing as they covered the body. He only stared at the fractured mirror. When Grant asked quietly, "Do you believe it's cursed?" Poirot answered in a low voice, "No, it is not cursed. It is a mirror. It only reflects what is there. But sometimes, Inspector, the truth is too terrible for a man to see. So it looks back and waits." That night, long after everyone had gone, Poirot remained alone in the study. The fire had died to ash, the lamps dimmed. He stood before the broken mirror one last time. His own reflection looked tired, older perhaps, yet calm. For a moment, he thought he saw another face just behind his own, but when he blinked, it was gone. He spoke softly to the silence. The death that watched itself was not the mirror's doing. It was man's. He turned to leave, but before stepping out, he caught a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye. The reflection was still there. Only this time, it didn't move when he did. Poirot smiled faintly. "Then watch, if you must," he whispered. "But I have seen enough." He closed the door behind him, and for the first time in years, the house felt completely, utterly still. Weeks later, Greyhaven Manor stood empty. The mirror was removed, crated, and sent to a museum in London. The curator who received it wrote in his report, "Surface stable, glass intact, minor fractures. However, in certain light, it appears to hold the faint outline of a face, even when the observer steps away." The truth of Edward Harland's death faded into rumor. Some said he shot himself in madness. Others swore his brother's heart stopped because the mirror had claimed a second soul. Poirot never spoke of it again. But those who knew him said that, from that case onward, he always carried a small, silver pocket mirror in his coat, and that on quiet nights, he would glance into it and murmur, "Just to make sure it's still me, looking back." If you enjoyed this dark and haunting mystery, the death that watched itself, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more chilling tales of Hercule Poirot. Every story hides a secret, and the next one might just be watching you.